At the end of Parshas Balak, the Torah tells us that Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron Cohen went ahead and stopped the Magefa. It stopped the plague that was going to happen when with Zimri living with one of the Gentile women. So we have a tradition in Chazal that Pinchas zu Eliyahu, that the great Eliyahu Hanavi, the one who comes to every Seder, the one who comes down for every Bris Milah, he's really the same as Pinchas. Pinchas never died, he became Eliyahu Hanavi. So, and the Gemara in Bamitzia and Daf Kuf Yudala takes this connection seriously, and the Gemara talks an incident where Eliyahu Hanavi was in the Beis HaKfaros, he was in a cemetery, and someone said to him, "What are you doing in the cemetery? Aren't you a Kohen? Aren't you a priest?" And we know one of the laws is forbidden for a Kohen to come in contact with the dead. So what are you doing in the cemetery? So there's a whole discussion in the Gemara there, machlokas in the Gemara, machlokas in the Rishonim, whether Kivrei Yaakov mitamim or not, whether the cemetery of a non-Jew is whether it defiles for a Kohen or not. So we'll come back to that, but the point being is that the Gemara takes the Chazal that Pinchas and Eliyahu are the same people, they're both Kohanim, and therefore the Gemara wants to know what is he doing in the cemetery. And in fact, Tosfos over there in Kuf Yudal asks from a story in Nach, from a story in Navi, when Eliyahu Navi, when he had to do Tchiyas HaMesim, he was staying by the widow, and her son was going to die, so to avoid Echel Hashem, etc., he went ahead and he saved the child's life. So Tosfos asks, how could he be involved in Tchiyas HaMesim? Is an Issa Daraisa for a Kohen to Mitame Lameis? What was the heter of Eliyahu Hanavi to come in contact with this dead child? So that's the Tosfos and many Rishonim ask. And there are many different answers given to the Shaila. I think we'll mention 3 or 4 today. So A1, answer number 1 to this question is from some Achronim that the child never died. He was very sick. It wasn't recognizable to the average person that he was alive. They thought he was dead, but ultimately he was really alive. And therefore, if he's alive, there's no problem for a Kohen to come in contact with that child. Other Rishonim Achronim find problem with that answer because it's mashrosh from the pasuk that he was dead. And secondly, even if you assume he was alive, there's a Gemara tells us, I think it's in Nazir, that a Kohen can't mitam even for a gosei. Someone who's alive but he's on his deathbed, you can't, a Kohen, that's a discussion in terms of the parameters of that halacha, but a Kohen can't go into a room with the goseis. So even if he was alive, how could Eliyahu do it? So the first answer is he never died, but that's a difficult answer. A2 is that the child was not Jewish, and therefore as Kivrei Yaakov Eino Mitamin, there's a discussion in the Gemara, Machokas in the Gemara, Machokas in the Rishonim, whether a Kohen could go into a room if there's a corpse of a non-Jew. So it's a Machokas in the Rishonim, so this sheet is going with the assumption that we paskin it's okay. Kivrei Yaakov Eino Mitamim, because that's the whole discussion in the Machaber Ramah. It says a Kohen can't go into Kivrei Yaakov. The question is, why not? So Pashas he can't go in because he's pasking like the Shita that Kivrei Yaakov are Mitamim. Others say maybe it's not approved, maybe there are Jews in the cemetery, and therefore that's why he can't go in. So either way, the second sheet is saying is he was a Gentile, and therefore it's not a problem. So the question on this is, even if he was a Gentile, most Rishonim hold, even if you assume Kivrei Akum Eino Metamim, that's only Eino Metamim Ba'ohel, being in the same room. But actually touching the mace, that's prohibited, and Pashas Elio was involved in touching the mace. A3 is a totally opposite extreme. They say it was Yonah, the famous Yonah, and it was Yonah HaTzadik. This child was a tzaddik, and therefore they quote the different chazals. We have discussion in different contexts that tzaddikim eino mitamim, righteous people aren't mitame, and therefore, since he was a tzaddik, and that's the whole discussion. The Gemara, Aron al Shel Yosef, how did the Jews become tamei in the Midbar, or in terms of whether they did or didn't when they were carrying the Aron Shel Yosef. There's a discussion about tzaddikim, kivrei tzaddikim eino mitamim. That's a whole discussion whether going. It comes up because it says when Rebbe died, Batlu Kahuna, that basically everyone was able to go to the cemetery, even Kohanim. So the question is why? Pashas is Meis Mitzvah, that for Nasi, so therefore anyone not going, it's like no one's there, a small crowd, and therefore it's like we view it as a Meis Mitzvah. Whether you say it for a Gadol Hador, that's a discussion. The Achronim, the norm of halacha seems to be that we do not, that we assume tzaddikim are mitamim, and therefore there's another difficulty with that answer because we assume it's not la halacha. So number one is that he was alive, but it seems to go against the pasuk and other reasons. Two, it's a guy, but it's a guy. You still can't mitame b'maga, you can't touch it. And three, even if it's a tzaddik, we assume tzaddikim mitamim. We assume tzaddikim are mitamim. So a fourth answer is from Tosfos. Tosfos writes, Bara lo sheyechiyehu. He was sure he was able to resurrect the dead. And the Tosfos writes, it's pikuach nefesh. We all know that save the big three, the halacha is that one, for the big three, one has a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, to go out Kiddush Hashem, to go alive for Kiddush Hashem. If someone puts a gun to it and says not to worship Avodah Zarah, to do Gilui Arayos, to do Ritzicha, so murder, so one has a mitzvah of giving up their life. However, save for the 610, that's the normal principle of v'chai b'hem lo yamus b'hem, that one has to live by it and not die by it, and therefore better to machal Shabbos achas to keep many more. So that's what the Tosfos is saying. It's true, he did violate an Issa D'Oraisa, a biblical prohibition of a Talmud. He was allowed to, he went to save lives. However, if this is so simple, so why didn't everyone say it? So why did the other Rishonim have to come up with other answers? He never died, Kivrei Akum. If it's so pashut, it doesn't sound obvious. Pikuach nefesh. It's docha kol Torah. So Rav Moshe Feinstein is a famous Jew, but others will have to go into this topic at a later date. But the question is, does one have a chiyuv of tchiyas hamesim? Does one have a chiyuv to resurrect the dead? We all believe it. Asu level, there's going to be tchiyas hamesim, going to be resurrected. But is there a mitzvah on it? If you have a chance to resurrect someone who's dead, do you have a chiyuv? Is there a mitzvah? That's what Rav Moshe discusses. Rav Moshe writes, no, we have a chiyuv of rofei cholim. We have a chiyuv of healing the sick. But there is no mitzvah in the Torah of tchiyas hamesim. And that's why it's true. If a person was walking down the street and his life was in danger, and it was Shabbos, or if you're a Kohen, and the only way to save the person's life is to become Tameh, so it's not a problem, pikuach nefesh. But here it's tchiyas hamesim, that's not derech hateva. You're only allowed to violate, which is a whole share in its own right, you're only allowed to violate an Issa D'Oraisa if it's a normative way, not for a supernatural way. In fact, that's the famous kasha was by David HaMelech in the Gemara Sukkah, when he said he wanted to know, could I throw in the Shem Hashem to stop the flood waters? So Achitophel said, like, yeah, if you got to destroy God's name to save one family, a husband and wife, put them back together, how much more so to save hundreds or thousands of people? So, what was the kasha? Why do they have to ask Achitophel? Anyone should know. Well, we know Pikuach Nefesh is Doch everything. So one of the answers given is no. That since, you're right, if there was a flood coming and then you had to build walls, put sand traps, and then it's no shayla. Of course, on Shabbos or whenever you go ahead and do it. But throwing in the Shem Hashem into water and causing the water to subside, that's not derech hateva. So it's not so simple. One could go ahead and violate an issa deraisa for something which isn't derech hateva, which could be, I don't know, derech seguli, or it can be malo mi derech hateva. So either way, we'll have to discuss that more, but that's the fourth approach. To summarize, how could Pinchas, who was Eliyahu, how could Eliyahu go ahead and metame, defile himself for this child of the Almanah? Either we said, number one, he never died, the child, so therefore the question doesn't even begin. 8.2 is non-Jewish, so therefore he's working with the opinion, Kivrei Akom Eino Metamim, there's no defilement by a non-Jew. 8.3 is the opposite, Yonah HaTzadik, Tzadikim Eino Metamim. And 8.4 is Pikuach Nefesh. Therefore it's true, you do violate an Issa D'Oraisa, but it's mutter. In fact, you have a chiyuv to violate the biblical prohibition to save someone's life.